Well, hello and welcome back to another discussion on the US presidential election. You remember that just about a week ago, well, more than a week ago, but on the eve of the election, we brought you a program in which we looked at the implications for the Caribbean of the outcome of that election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Well, we didn't have a result at the time, so we were kind of speculating in terms of what we expected to happen in the event one of the two won the election. Well, since then we've had the result, and we all know that Donald Trump beat Kamala Harris, and we're now able to say with a certain amount of certainty that the policies of Donald Trump, depending on what they are, could affect the Caribbean, Dominica and the Caribbean. And so we've brought back Ambassador Crispin Gregoire to have a conversation, with us here at DNO about, the result of the election and the possibilities, for the impact on the Caribbean that are presented by the fact that Donald Trump has won the election. Ambassador Gregoire, welcome back to DNO. It's a pleasure always to have you.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Tim, and thanks to DNO for having me again. And quite a historic moment that we are in. And yes, so it's an honor to be here to talk to you about U.S. policy that we could see emanating from Washington from January.
Okay, before we get down to,
Right.
well, we know the election, the result, as I said, we know that Donald Trump has beaten Kamala Harris, and it would seem that that result has taken much of America, by surprise. Not only the Democrats are they, basically flabbergasted, but even Trump supporters did not expect the magnitude, of that victory. Um, and there's been a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking, from supporters of the Democratic Party and members of the party itself and officials and so on, the Kamala Harris's campaign, as to why she got such a drubbing, from Trump. From as someone who has lived in the United States, and followed, politics in the United States and other parts of the world, what do you think happened?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think the Democrats appreciated the fact that the Biden administration had lost popular support, and largely because of the economic realities that set in after COVID. And I think the administration, they did a very good job at restructuring and rebuilding the U.S. economy, especially dealing with manufacturing, with employment generation, and really returning the United States back to pre-COVID levels of employment, of economic progress. And they did achieve that well. I think that what was a major problem for them, and they couldn't manage that one, was the rate of inflation, which started about 9% when they took office. Although they brought it down to 3%, but it's not. You couldn't see over the 4 years that significant decline to the 3%. So a lot of Americans, when they think of Biden, they think that Trump did better economically. Trump did worse economically, but most Americans don't fully understand, and I think they will soon find out that Biden was really good for the U.S. economy in really stabilizing the hemorrhaging that happened under Trump, and the fact that the U.S. needed to return to economic progress and productivity, and I think they achieved that. Now, significant legislation was passed during the Biden administration, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, Recovery Act, which is a massive piece of legislation that will actually help Trump, because he's the one who's going to spend most of that money, and so we can talk about that too.
Yes, so I think there, though, before we continue, to look at the meat of our discussion, do you think, though, that there could possibly have been a communication problem. If you're saying that Biden's economic policies were better than Trump, and the economy was doing better, because what is coming back, from the numerous assessments that are being done, is that the people who did not actually feel it. In fact, that's what even Democrats, who voted, for Trump, they're making that argument that they didn't actually feel the impact of whatever policies that Biden, had implemented. Do you think then in that case that there could have been a messaging problem on the part of the Democrats?
I don't think there was a messaging problem. I think there was some outcomes of the policy that affected them and some things that the administration had no control over. Like, for example, interest rates. I mean, on interest rates were high, and it was a deliberate policy to keep interest rates high so you could bring inflation down. Now, what that meant is that most young Americans who were young in the workforce, it made it difficult for them to buy houses. And for when it comes to housing, America has a housing problem, a shortage of housing. And then high interest rates, it means that mortgages were out of the reach of a lot of people. And so a lot of people who would have liked to buy a house in those 4 years had to wait for the interest rates to come down. And the interest rates have come down a little bit, but they haven't reached where they should be to make people really feel comfortable that they can invest in a 30-year mortgage, for example. So that's another arena where the people felt that. And then rents skyrocketed during that time. So a lot of people over their neck in terms of rent. They can't buy a house, so they blame the administration. But what they fail to realize is that what the administration has done for you is to make sure you have a job. And that was sort of the laser focus of the Biden administration. Get people back to employment, get the economy moving again, invest in the economy, help manufacturing, help the steel industries, help the oil industry, and let them take off. And there has been a certain measure of progress. In fact, the U.S. economy is doing better than everybody else in the world. But Americans don't seem to have grasped that, and that did not factor in. They blame Biden for a bad economic situation, when the economic situation is not that bad. It's actually good.
Which takes me back to the same question, because critics and pundits and even Democratic strategists within their own party are saying, well, hey, you guys lost touch, with the rural people, the average American. You were not. I mean, even if you felt that your policies were good for the economy and were working to a certain extent, you were not in touch with the feelings of the people, and therefore you were not communicating, your message clearly enough, to them, so they could understand, well, hey, while I may not be getting what I want, but here's what's in place, and I expect from what the Democrats are telling me that things will get better.
Right. I think the Democrats did not do a good job at selling their positive outcomes that came out from their policies, because some good things came out. I mean, look at the student loan issue. Of course, it got shut down by the courts, but that was a very noble approach to helping a lot of people. One might say, well, it's college students that were helped, and that not all Americans have gone to college and all of that. So, but yes, but what Biden and them have done is to make a dent in the debt trap that a lot of people were caught in, and will never be able to pay their loans off. And so I think there were some good things that Biden done. And then here's to me Biden's signature achievement is with climate change. He's the first president ever in the United States to really squarely address this existential threat, and has invested significant money into climate change adaptation and mitigation, and people don't appreciate that. But I'll tell you, this notion that America can continue to drill, baby, drill, is not going to get the United States anywhere. It's going to leave them behind. It's going to, and I believe that one of the first things that's going to happen, and we may see that on January 20th when Trump becomes formally inaugurated, he might pull out of the Paris Climate Change Accords, which he had pulled out already. Biden came back and returned to it, but now the threat of Trump pulling out from the Climate Change Accord is great. And I expect that could happen as early as the day he's inaugurated.
Okay, there's a plethora of areas that we could talk about in terms of what critics are suggesting now could be the reasons for a democratic loss. But I think we want to focus more on what a Trump win now means for the Caribbean, you know. We talked about some of Trump's policies in the last program,
Yes.
but what are some of the specific things, you know, that Trump has talked about and given the impression, you know, that he's going to implement as his overall policy, you think should be of concern
Right.
to the Caribbean?
Well, I would say that the first thing that we need to appreciate and grasp is that where the Caribbean is located is called the third border of the U.S. After Canada and Mexico. I expect that immigration will be a big issue for the Caribbean, immigration to the U.S., and the real threat of deportations from the U.S. to the Caribbean. So that's one.
Okay, you're gonna, okay, well, yeah, you can probably outline the areas that you're gonna look at, and you can look at them in more detail.
Right.
Yes, okay.
So immigration is going to be one, but I think the leading issue that's going to be of concern to the U.S. and the Caribbean is China and the Caribbean. I believe there's going to be competition, intense competition between the United States and China in the region, because China has a big presence in the region. They've become, for some of these Caribbean countries, the largest trading partner past the U.S. China has also invested a lot in terms of state-to-state investments. Not so much private sector, although that's beginning to grow now. So I believe that Trump he has made utterances about the Monroe Doctrine and returning to a situation where the U.S. doesn't want any powers meddling in his backyard. And I believe that, like the Reagan administration did with the Cubans and the Soviets back in '83 during the Grenada Revolution, I can see that a kind of neoconservative thinking about the role of China in the Caribbean as a threat to U.S. strategic interests. So I think that's going to be an overriding theme of the entire 4 years of Trump in the White House. The other troublesome issue, is Haiti. Haiti has been always a naughty problem, and continues to be in the worst situation. We have the Kenyan troops in Haiti now, supported by the U.S. financially. But what I think is still lacking is that intervention of the Kenyan troops and some Caribbean troops has not transformed into a formal UN Security Council decision to have a peacekeeping mission. So it's short of a peacekeeping mission from the Security Council, and that's a problem, and I think that has to be worked. And I don't know whether the Trump administration will champion that. Trump says that he's a peace president, he doesn't like war, and so on. So I suppose that he will support the Kenyan troops and see, but the reality is that American troops will not be on the ground, not under Trump. Then there's the energy sector. We have massive oil finds in Guyana, we have massive oil finds in Suriname, and now we're hearing that there's deep sea oil around Grenada. So the Caribbean has oil, but it comes into a kind of a contradiction: oil and sustainable development and the climate crisis. So on the one hand, you now have new producers of oil in the Caribbean, like Guyana, Suriname has been an oil producer, but now they have offshore oil. So they had onshore oil, and now they have offshore oil, which they're about to exploit. The question is here are these island nations and low-lying coastal states like a Suriname or Guyana, who are not islands but in South America but identify with the Caribbean, and face the problems of the climate crisis. They are poised to become big oil producers. And that puts them in a very contradictory position. They're saying, well, they should be allowed to earn their oil, but it's that same oil that's causing the global warming. So where do we draw the line? So that's the question that the Caribbean countries will have to address. And now I'm hearing that Grenada has signed an agreement to exploit their oil. So I think that the U.S. under Trump will want to see more of oil development in the region. Of course, U.S. companies are leading the charge. In Guyana, it's ExxonMobil. I believe that they also have some involvement in Suriname, although it's some you have Dutch companies in Suriname and maybe Italy that's now going to develop this. And then you have the Venezuelan situation. That takes us to Venezuela. So Venezuela becomes a huge focus for the United States on immigration, on oil, and then the conflict with Guyana and Venezuela is that. And how does that all portend for energy transition in the Caribbean? Tim, I've always had the position that Petrocarib was a good pill, but it also was a bad pill, because I think the governments didn't understand that what President Chavez attempted to do was give them a stopgap measure to get off oil, but they liked the candy of Petrocarib so much that they stuck with it, and now many of them have not made the kind of transition and that they should have already made, right? Then there's Cuba. That's another problem for U.S. policy, and we'll talk about that. And of course, there are things like artificial intelligence, what the U.S. is going to do. I'm hearing that the U.S. wants to be the leading artificial intelligence place in the world. And
who is at the moment? Which country leads in this regard?
Probably it's China. Probably it's China, and close to China is Taiwan, because they're really big in the semiconductors industry and so on. So, but AI, I think, is going to be a competition between the U.S. and China, right? And the last thing I want to mention, Tim, that's going to be a huge preoccupation for Trump, is the defense budget of the U.S. and the U.S. military outlay and their position in the world, as far as the military presence of the U.S. across the world. It's really of concern to me that the U.S. defense budget is almost $1 trillion a year. It's close to that. It's like 900 billion, and we'll soon reach $1 trillion. I don't know why the U.S. is spending all this money on weapons. They're not at war.
But Trump himself has said he is not interested in war. Eh?
Right, he said that, but he will continue to spend that level of spending on defense, because they don't want the U.S. doesn't want to be surpassed by any other power. China is quickly ramping up their military development and their weapon systems. And this morning I was looking at latest news. They're showing a Chinese-made helicopter that's pretty advanced, and that could compete with any of the U.S. Helicopters, and they are building large fleet of warships. So they are ramping up their military capability, and to challenge United States. So that's.
All right, that's a pretty wide range of areas, that Trump administration policy could impact the Caribbean.
Yes.
Let's go back to immigration, which is your first mention, and it's a pretty important one for us in the Caribbean. What is your understanding, in a nutshell, of Trump's policy on immigration?
I think Trump would like to shut the border down and keep immigrants out to a great extent, and maybe allow a number of legal immigrants in every year as the U.S. does, but he wants to make sure that the border is sealed. The problem with that
And there's
is
also this element of mass deportation, eh?
right,
Because
and
of
there's
that,
the element
his policy.
of mass
In fact, he has appointed an immigration czar, so to speak,
That's correct.
and the deputy chief of staff,
Yeah.
who's, that's one of his areas of
The deputy
operation.
chief of
Miller.
staff, Miller,
Miller.
Miller was the one who ran the immigration policy in the first Trump administration, and we know of what transpired. Now, I should say that, Tim, that it's important for your viewers to understand that we can only speculate about how Trump may behave as president in the second term based on what he did in the first term. But it's possible that he might do a radically different approach to governance because this time he's more prepared, whereas before it was really like a fluke. He didn't think he was ever going to win, and so on. Having said that, Trump comes in as a backdrop, comes into power as the second time, where United States has many challenges at the end of the first quarter of this century. The reality is that United States is on decline as a power, as a world power. They are not yet the second power in the world, but I'll tell you, they have a major competitor, and that's People's Republic of China, who, in terms of their economic progress and the economic production, has surpassed the U.S. So that's already one. The other thing is that, Tim, is the U.S. population is only 300 million.
Was 330,000.
Right,
Oh, million.
million,
It was
right,
340, yeah.
yeah. And America has always think of itself as a big country, but when you have that, compare it to India or compare it to China, these countries have 1 billion people, and China now doesn't. While they want to make sure that they're in the U.S. as a major trading partner, because that's probably where they earn the most money from goods and services that they export, the Chinese see America as a very small part of the global market. So when, for example, like Trump is talking about putting tariffs on goods produced in China, the Chinese don't care about that. They say, oh, well, we have the whole world at our disposal. So if me 300 million don't want to buy our thing or it's too expensive for them, we just shift our production to other parts of the world. And that's what's happening. They're already.
That's interesting, though, because this is not the impression that is being conveyed in America by say, officials of the Trump administration or even the Democrats themselves, In other words, there's this whole American psyche
Yes.
that United States is still the dominant power in the world,
Right.
and these policies will affect other countries. And we can talk also about the foreign policy and so on.
Yes.
That's the same thinking.
Right.
So it doesn't seem to be something that's shared by the Americans.
I
That's
think,
sort of
well,
thinking.
Tim, I may get criticized for saying that, but I'll tell you that most Americans are very naive about governance, political issues, and the rest of the world. They don't understand the rest of the world. They think America is the world. America is not the world. And America is quickly running out of a lot of resources. America is running out of oil. Right now, they are producing a lot of oil because of fracking. But when that shale is dry and there'll be no oil in there, they will have to go back to importing oil. Right now, Now, America is a sophisticated country. I will hasten to add that. They have a sophisticated economy. But America is facing many challenges. One, the aging of the population. That is why they need workers. They need to have an immigration policy. And Tim, my concern about America is that they have not dealt with the immigration challenge, because America is a place that has a pull effect. It pulls immigrants because it has a buoyant economy. It has had that for the last 100 years. But now America is reaching a point where its ability to compete with other powers, especially China, but now India. And then you have smaller powers, because we reach a point in the world where we are multipolar. So there are many small powers, like a Turkey, for example, like a Saudi Arabia. You see the emergence of the BRICS. That's South Africa, China, Russia, India is there. we're seeing the whole map of the world is quickly changing right before our eyes. Many people are not seeing it, but it's happening quick. And we're only 1/4 of the century. So my view is that a lot of people look at 2030 as a major barometer and a milepost because of the sustainable development goals and dealing with poverty, which the world has not dealt with well. America has, I see with Trump coming in, America is going to withdraw from the global theater. This America First idea has the tendency for an isolationist United States. And that's what I see coming. So that's sort of the larger context.
This is the impression I get too,
Yeah.
Crispin. And what is being suggested is that Trump is not interested in being the policeman of the world, right? He's not interested in policing the world. He's not interested in this. Well, he may be interested in the superpower thing, that he still wants America to be a dominant force, but he's more interested in transactional arrangements, something that is going to bring something back to America, whatever country he deals with, more perhaps on a bilateral basis. So that's the impression I'm getting to.
Well, one of the things Trump would like to achieve, and I don't think it's achievable, and that is he would like to bring back the manufacturing sector that was exported to China in the 1990s, in the 2000s, early 2000s. That's not possible because what the Chinese did, the Chinese welcome American investment, welcome partnership with American, and then they got hold of the intellectual property, and they copied it. So and here's the other thing they've done very well, team. They have sent thousands of students to the U.S. to study, and they have gone back home. And then a lot of companies that were studied in the U.S., which are Chinese people, they have moved back to mainland China, right? So the U.S. in terms of competing with China, I don't see that. And here's where the U.S. is losing ground in what I call the new pillars of the new economy that is emerging after the first 25 years of this century. So we're moving now away from iron and steel. We're moving to the end of the combustion engine, to electric cars, of which Trump is opposed to. Although now he has Elon Musk in his orbit, so Elon Musk is telling him electric cars are good. If you don't believe in climate change, you will think the combustion engine will eternally be here, but the end of the combustion engine is right around us. You cannot continue with putting all of these emissions in the air from vehicles. So that needs to be addressed. I think that, I said it before, United States is losing its preeminent position in the world in a number of arenas. Now, on the immigration thing, there is a demand for labor in the United States. There's always been a demand for labor. And if you look at the sectors like agriculture, the hospitality industry with hotels, you look at restaurants, you look at the people who do menial labor in the U.S., there's always a demand for these people, and that is why immigrants who come as undocumented workers, they thrive there because they can survive. There's a demand for them. Now, the other thing that needs to be told is that a lot of these people who are undocumented, what Trump will call illegal aliens, I don't like that term, illegal aliens, but I call them undocumented workers. These people have paid sales tax from the time they land in America. You can't just kick them out. I think that there's going to be a lot of legal battles. The American Civil Liberties Union will spring into action, and many other immigrant groups who have legal arms will challenge anything on immigration. And then you find that the states where governors are democratic, this notion of sanctuary cities, they hold very dear, and they're not going to be kicking out people just like that. Because if you kick out 11 million undocumented people,
About how much of that figure is Caribbean?
I would say maybe about 5% because it's still small, with Haitians being the largest group of the English Caribbean, followed by Jamaicans. Not English, they're French Caribbean, but followed by the Jamaicans who are English. So it's still small numbers. But what I want people to understand about the undocumented aliens in the U.S., a lot of them are not people of color. They're actually white people who come from, a lot of them come from Italy, from Eastern Europe, a lot of them from Eastern Europe, because they could enter the US for 90 days without visa. So they come and they overstay their visa. So a large sector of that, and it's actually, the figure is more like 15 million rather than 11 million, right? So a lot of these people, they come from all over the world, but a lot of them are Europeans. So that's something that we need to get clear.
But do you think that if Trump were to implement, his mass deportation policy, that it would be discriminatory?
Oh, absolutely. It will be discriminatory. And here's the thing. You remember in Trump's first term, he called some countries shithole countries. I think Trump still believes these are shithole countries. What that will do, what the deportation will do, if he is successful at doing that, it will create a dislocation across the world that we will never see the end, because it's going to destabilize a lot of countries. It will destabilize Caribbean countries, even though that 5%, let's say we have about 5% of that number. It could be a higher figure. It could be even 10%. Can you imagine these people sent back home, Tim, across the Caribbean, what that will mean for the Caribbean countries in terms of stability? And you'll be bringing people who have criminal records, you'll be having. So I think that Trump and them have not thought about the implications for the rest of the world, for the countries they'll send these people back. Some of these people were actually born in the U.S. They don't have papers. They have no connection with the countries where they'll be sent back to. So that's another set of problems that will emerge if that comes to pass. I don't believe it's going to come to pass. As I said, it's going to be tied up in litigation, and that could take the 4 years of his term, and when that comes. But here's what I think the solution to the immigration problem, which the Republicans are not addressing. They're going to have to do an amnesty, like President Reagan did in the 80s, because there are too many people to deport. I mean, think of it, Tim. That cost for deportation will have to be borne by the U.S. government, So these are some of the intricacies of the immigration challenge.
And there'll also be pushback from, if you will, I'm trying to look into the word, to the standpoint of the harm, emotional harm that it could cause to say families, right?
Oh, yes.
Where the children may be legal and the parents are not,
Exactly.
Right?
So you have that problem.
And there's certainly to be pushback.
There will be pushback.
Against that,
yes. Yeah, as I said, there's going to be legal battles in the courts around immigration.
Right. Okay, so let's look at the China situation.
Yes.
Specific to what are the implications. How will, say, a Trump or the Trump administration concern, say, over China's expansionist, policy in the rest of the world, right?
Right.
How could that ultimately affect the Caribbean?
Right. Well, I think that what Trump will do, he will encourage the countries that are still recognize China, not China, but Taiwan, to stay the course with Taiwan, and not try to have any kind of change of the number of countries that have diplomatic relations with China and those who have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The Taiwanese have been losing ground with the numbers of countries that have diplomatic relations with them. The Chinese have made sure to try to whittle down the number of countries. But there are some countries in the CARICOM that remain with Taiwan. So you have St. Lucia, you have St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you have St. Kitts Nevis, you have Belize. Haiti, I'm not sure where they are, if they have recognized one China. They were with Taiwan at one point, so that would make 5. So that's 5 against 9. So there are 9 countries that have relations with one China, embrace one China policy. I think the U.S. will, under Trump, will urge those 5 countries that still have relations with Taiwan to remain with Taiwan. Now, Tim, there was a kind of a gentleman's agreement between the Chinese and the Taiwanese that they would end the competition in the Caribbean. And to some extent, that has worked for the last 10 years. Because when St. Lucia is a good case in point. They had diplomatic relations with China at first. Um, Prime Minister Compton changed it back to Taiwan. And when the new government came back, I think Kenny Anthony's government, the Chinese said, no, we don't want to upset the balance, so you remain with Taiwan and leave it that way. So that's how it has remained. So that's the first thing. But you see the Chinese presence has just grown in leaps and bounds in the region. And the Chinese have invested quite a bit in the countries that they have diplomatic relations with. And they would like more of the countries, the five that remain with Taiwan, they would like them to come. I mean,
But you're saying that the Trump policy could work towards preventing that from happening.
he will give them incentives to stay with
stay,
Taiwan, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so that because that's of interest, that helps U.S. interests better
Right.
than if the Chinese were to take all.
But is there any other way that he could harm, say, those countries that have already established relations with China and
No, he
supported
won't.
the One
He,
China
he
policy?
yeah, he won't harm them, but he will probably not give much development assistance. There will be some quid pro quo that will determine how much assistance he gives them in terms of development assistance, right?
But United States aid in the region is already declining, significantly.
Substantially. In fact, the U.S. is negligible in that respect. The U.S. doesn't give much development assistance anymore, and now we're going to face another new problem with U.S. financing, and that's with the climate finance. Because with the U.S., with Trump seeing climate change as a hoax, he has no interest in giving money for adaptation or mitigation to climate change, which is a core concern for the Caribbean countries. Every single one of them, you know the challenge of hurricanes every season. And the Caribbean, all it takes is one hurricane to set back the economy for, you lost 200% of your GDP. You know, that's what happened to Dominica with Maria, and St. Vincent and Grenada just got hit by this in this season, and they've lost a lot. So now they need climate finance to rebound, and that money is elusive. And even as the Conference of Parties for the Climate Change has just started in Baku in Azerbaijan on Monday, and one of the major issues is that countries who created the problem must ramp up climate finance to countries like a Dominica, like a Grenada or Jamaica, or all of these Caribbean countries. So we'll see a decline of climate finance because the U.S. is not engaged. And what's likely to happen if the U.S. pulls out of the climate accord, then the contribution of the U.S. to climate adaptation and mitigation is gone forever. And that will be a sad blow for the Caribbean countries. So their transition to renewable energy, which the U.S. under Biden was helping, there was a partnership that I remember when you had the Summit of the Americas in California about 2 years ago. The U.S. made big pledges to help the Caribbean countries with two arenas. One is disaster mitigation, and the energy transition to renewables, which the U.S. has that technology and can make it more available. But I don't see Trump being focused on that. I think, as far as he's concerned, that's an arena to cut money for us to save money. And Tim, I should also hasten to add is that the U.S. economy, the U.S. has a debt problem. The U.S. is now the world's largest debtor nation. They owe about $30-something trillion. And
China being the biggest, the largest debtor, right?
right. China has lent them money through bonds. So China is holding a substantial bond of the United States. And China could actually cripple the U.S. dollar. And they're not doing it directly. Here's what they're doing through the BRICS, through the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What they're doing is now they are moving away from the dollar as the only medium of exchange. So they're trading in their own currencies now. So reducing the reliance on the dollar, and that's how the Chinese are looking to weaken the dollar, and that is something to watch going forward.
Let's take a closer look
Yes.
at the situation as regards Venezuela. You did mention it in your opening remarks. And I mean, it centers around oil, and then Petrocaribe is a critical aspect, you know, of that whole thing. What exactly do you foresee, you know, if Trump, whatever policy he has with regard to oil, because he believes in oil, eh?
Yeah, right.
You know, he believes in promoting oil. In fact, that's that fits in with his climate change position,
Right.
where he doesn't, you know, think that alternative energy is viable, and also, how can one put it, that he don't think it's America's interest to go that route, right? So, how do you see that policy affecting the Venezuelan situation, and the Venezuela's relations with the rest of the Caribbean?
Well, the first thing about Venezuela is that is the most recent development of an election that was not conclusive. Apparently, President Maduro may have lost the election, but the courts have decided that he is the winner, and the inauguration is coming in January. Of course, the United States under Biden has not recognized that election result and has called on Venezuela to produce the results, the basis for Maduro's win, and that's not forthcoming. And I believe Maduro is just going to stand his ground and not leave office. With Trump, it's very unpredictable what could happen because under his first term, Trump almost intervened militarily into Venezuela. I mean, he had surrounded the Atlantic coast of Venezuela with U.S. troop carriers. I mean, they almost went into Venezuela. Now, I worry about what could happen there. That's an arena that could be a real conflict. That the prospect of U.S. intervention in Venezuela is high.
But given that Trump has indicated his reluctance to get involved in conflicts, to get involved in war, so to speak, what do you think might prompt him to to want to get into, you know, such a conflict with Venezuela, to get into
Well,
any kind of, you know?
I think that there's some American conservative strategists who think that removing the Maduro regime is an option that should not be ruled out. And what that would do, it would make the largest of oil in Venezuela now available to the U.S. because the Venezuelan oil under Chavez was kind of nationalized and they kicked out ExxonMobil and all of that. I think the U.S. government would like to their companies back in Venezuela because Venezuela has the largest endowment of oil in the world, even larger than Saudi Arabia. It's just that their oil is a high sulfur oil, which requires much more refining. But they have they have more oil than everybody else in the world. And then the regime of Maduro is bordering on real dictatorship. They have also started the ALBA, which is opposed to U.S. So there are those problems. Now, one thing though that the U.S. did appreciate, to give the U.S. some credit, they were not opposed at all to Venezuela investing in the CARICOM because it sort of took off from them that responsibility. So here's another donor coming in. Oh, we don't have to spend our money. That's what the Americans think. And of course, they were happy that the Venezuelans were spending in infrastructure in these islands like Dominica and so on. But the U.S. is also concerned about Venezuelan imperial interests in the region. Venezuela wants to be the power of the region. And how does that come into
Geopolitics.
Yeah, because of course the U.S. is clear that Venezuela is undisputably the second power. They have the capability, and they use Bird Rock, what's called Isla de Aves. That's Bird Island for Dominica. They have a naval base there, and that's how they project their naval power in the region. So they're physically. I say to people, Venezuela is not just a South American country. They're also a Caribbean country. They are our neighbor. They're Dominica's neighboring country. And one of the things that will have to happen in the future for Dominica is that, and I don't see it happening until a new government comes in Dominica, is that we have to treat Venezuela as a neighboring country who has an exclusive economic zone, or we have an exclusive economic zone that borders around Venezuelan territory. But Venezuela has no exclusive economic zone because Bird Rock is not even an island. It's just a bank, a sandbank. It has no territorial waters, and it has no exclusive economic zone. But Bird Rock is in Dominica's 200-mile economic zone to our west coast, and we now have to treat that as part of our territory. But that's for later on. But that's something that we need to look at. As far as how the Venezuelan and this U.S. situation, it's an unfolding problem. I think when right now Biden is coming to an end, I don't think he's going as a lame duck. He's not going to do anymore. But when Trump comes in, let us watch out for the pronouncement on Venezuela. And I think that Trump will be very hard-nosed with Maduro and will want Maduro to give the evidence for his victory at the polls. If not, I think Trump is going to destabilize Venezuela.
And that would affect us ultimately.
That
I mean,
will
us
affect-
meaning the Caribbean
Right.
ultimately,
Yeah,
or the
absolutely.
countries that with which Venezuela has relations. Right.
The region, it will be in a war situation. There'll be warships in the area, you know. The Southern Command is going to be in Panama is going to be much more active in the region. So, I think it will be important, Tim, for the Caribbean countries not to hide their heads in the sand, but to engage the U.S. towards a peace agenda. And a solution to Venezuela that the U.S. alone does not determine, because it's going to affect us too. So we need to find a common ground, maybe through the OAS. Of course, Venezuela had pulled out from the OAS under Maduro, so we don't know how that's going to happen there. But it's not an easy reality to challenge.
Okay, well, Ambassador Gregoire, thank you very much. I mean, you've outlined some, pretty concerning
Yes.
areas of concern that the Caribbean ought to, be mindful of as we await the unfolding of Trump's
Right.
administration and the policies that he's going to implement and how he plans to implement them. Any closing words?
I would say it will be important for CARICOM to engage the Trump administration early, and even in this transition process that's on the way, that the diplomats in Washington must be paying close attention to what will unfold and how they can influence or at least engage through dialogue with the people who are coming in. Now, one of the things that's going to happen is Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. He's a Cuban. He's a Cuban American. I think he's going to be very focused on Cuba, and he's going to be very focused on Venezuela. So let's prepare for that. He's also a Chinese hawk. He's anti-China, and has been the architect of some of these tariffs on China and more restrictive kind of policies towards China. And now he's the secretary. He's going to be the Secretary of State. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this unfolds. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ambassador Gregoire. Always a pleasure to have you with
Sure,
us.
anytime.
And we
I
really
really
appreciate,
appreciate it.
the
Yeah.
information, very
Yes.
useful,
Okay.
Insightful information that you've been providing,
Yes. Okay, great.
to our viewers.
Yes, okay.
And thank you, viewers, for watching. We'll let you know the next time we're going to have another such discussion on DNO, so you can join us. Thank you very much.